everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into something that I think a lot of you will find fascinating. It's the psychology of climate change.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, what we need to do about this crisis,
Right.
but what about how we feel about it?
Yeah, and specifically how those feelings can either, help us or hinder us when
Absolutely.
it comes to taking action. So we've got two really interesting sources to help us unpack all of this.
Okay.
First, we have this article called Beyond Action for Action's Sake. It's by a climate psychologist named Steffi Bednarek.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then we're also going to be looking at the UN's Emissions Gap Report 2023.
Right, which basically tells us how far off track we are from meeting our emissions targets.
Exactly. So one is kind of about, the emotional landscape,
Yeah,
and the other is about, the cold, hard data.
right. But what's fascinating is how these two things are actually deeply intertwined.
Okay, so Bednarek's article really grabbed me right from the start.
All right.
Yeah, she mentions the statistic that over half of Brits feel like climate change is negatively impacting their mental health.
Wow, that's a significant portion of the population.
Right. It's not just like a small group of people who are, overly anxious or something.
Exactly.
This is like everyday people feeling the pressure.
And, when you look at the emissions gap report,
Mm-hmm.
it's really not surprising. I mean, this report lays out how we're on track for a temperature rise
Yeah.
way above what was agreed upon in the Paris Agreement.
Right.
We're talking, specific temperature rise, which is way off track. So
Yeah.
that disconnect between what we want and what's actually happening,
Mm-hmm.
that's enough to make anyone anxious.
Yeah. It's like that feeling when, you should be eating healthy and exercising,
Yeah.
but you keep reaching for the junk food and hitting that snooze button.
Right. It's bad for you long term, but you can't seem to help yourself.
Exactly. It's that mental tension.
Yeah, and that's where Bednarek's argument, I think, gets really interesting.
Oh.
She says that all this just act
Mm.
rhetoric that we hear all the time around climate change,
Yeah.
it can actually backfire
Hmm.
if we don't address the emotional elephant in the room.
Okay, so it's not enough to just tell people to recycle more or, go vegan or whatever.
Right.
We need to actually acknowledge the emotional weight of this crisis.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to create space for people to process those feelings.
So what does that look like? I mean, how do we actually do that?
Well, she uses this term, moral injury.
Moral injury.
Yeah, which I think is really powerful.
Okay.
It's this feeling of deep distress and burnout that comes from witnessing harm that you feel powerless to stop.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. But can you give me like a real world example?
Sure. So imagine you're a doctor working in a severely underfunded hospital.
Okay.
You're seeing patients suffer every day, even die, because they can't afford the treatment they need.
Yeah.
You're doing everything you can, but the system is failing them.
Right.
That feeling of helplessness and frustration, that's moral injury.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, that really puts it into perspective. So how does this moral injury show up in the context of climate change?
Well, think about the scientists who are dedicating their lives to studying climate change.
Mm-hmm.
They're seeing the data firsthand, the alarming trends,
Mm.
the predictions of what's to come.
Mm-hmm.
And they're seeing that, a lot of people aren't taking it seriously.
Right. Or even the activists who are, working tirelessly to try to raise awareness and push for change, but they're constantly hitting a wall.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're fighting for this cause that they deeply believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But the sheer scale of the problem and the lack of progress,
Mm.
it can be so disheartening.
So it's not just about being sad about the planet.
Right.
It's this deeper sense of like powerlessness.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you're watching this train wreck in slow motion
Uh-huh.
and you can't do anything to stop it.
And according to Bednarek, ignoring these feelings
Yeah.
can actually make us less resilient in the long run.
Okay, so then how do we deal with these heavy emotions? How do we actually build genuine resilience in the face of this crisis?
Well, Bednarek says it starts by acknowledging and processing those tough emotions,
Okay.
like fear, grief, anger.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to bury them, she says we need to allow ourselves to actually feel them.
There's that saying, right?
Yeah.
Name it to tame it. Like just admitting that you're stressed can actually make you feel less stressed.
Exactly. It's about creating space for those emotions
Yeah.
rather than pretending everything is
Right,
fine.
so it's not about being, happy-go-lucky
Right.
and pretending that everything is fine.
It's about acknowledging the reality of the situation,
Right.
including the emotions that it brings up,
Yeah.
and finding ways to keep going.
Okay, now one thing that really stood out to me in Bednarek's article was how much she emphasized the importance of collective action.
Yeah.
She talks about needing a collective container for collective healing. It's like we
Yeah.
can't just be individuals freaking out in our own little corners.
Right? We need each other.
Yeah, we need to come together and support each other.
And that's something that I see echoed in the emissions gap report as well.
Yeah.
You know, it strongly emphasizes international collaboration and support, especially for developing nations,
Yeah.
to achieve these emissions goals. It's a global problem that requires a global solution.
Right. It's like realizing that you can't clean up a polluted river by yourself. You need a whole community working together.
Absolutely.
And speaking of community, Bednarik actually mentions a few organizations that are doing really great work in this area.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like creating those support systems that she's talking about. She highlights the Climate Psychology Alliance, the Good Grief Network, Gendread the Pocket Project, and the Center for Climate Psychology and Change.
That's great. I think it's so important to have these resources available.
Yeah, because it can feel really overwhelming to face this crisis alone.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've got these two seemingly different things, the cold, hard data of the emissions gap report, and then this deep dive into our emotional world with Bednarik. They might seem worlds apart, but
they're completely connected.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so powerful about this.
Understanding the psychological and emotional dimensions of climate change. It's not about giving up. It's about equipping ourselves for the long haul.
So it's not about ignoring the facts or pretending everything is fine. It's about finding ways to deal with those hard truths and keep fighting for change.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to be exploring further in the next part of our deep dive.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back after a quick break. Okay, so we're back, and I really want to keep unpacking this idea of moral injury in the context of climate change. I think it's something that a lot of people, myself included, haven't really considered before.
Yeah, it's definitely a concept that's gaining more traction as we start to really understand the psychological impacts of this crisis.
Yeah.
For so long, the focus has been on the physical consequences.
Right, like melting glaciers, rising sea levels.
Exactly. Extreme weather events.
But the mental and emotional toll is just as real.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like climate change is this giant elephant in the room. We can see it. We know it's there.
Yeah.
But we've been so focused on, its physical footprint that we've neglected the emotional one.
Yeah, and that's what brings us back to Bednarek's point about moral injury. Yeah. Right? It's not just about feeling sad or worried about the planet. It's this deeper sense of betrayal, of helplessness, of witnessing harm that you feel unable to stop.
Okay, so let's say I'm feeling this moral injury.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like? What are the signs?
Well, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. You might experience anxiety, depression, anger. You might feel a sense of hopelessness or despair, a loss of motivation, even difficulty sleeping.
Yeah.
Some people might withdraw from social situations or disengage from activities they used to enjoy.
So it can really impact your daily life.
Absolutely, your well-being.
And what's tricky is that these feelings are often amplified by the very things that are supposed to motivate us to act.
Right.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, think about the emissions gap report.
Okay.
It paints a very stark picture of how far off track we are from meeting our climate goals.
Right.
It highlights the urgency of the situation.
Yeah.
The need for immediate and drastic action.
Yeah.
But for someone who's already experiencing moral injury, that sense of urgency can be overwhelming.
Right.
It can make them feel even more powerless, even more hopeless.
So it's like you're already feeling defeated, and then someone comes along and says, hey, the situation is even worse than you thought. You need to do more, and you need to do it now.
Exactly.
It's almost counterproductive.
Yeah, and that's why Bednarek emphasizes the importance of addressing the emotional side of this crisis.
Right.
Alongside the practical steps that we need to take. It's not just about doing something. It's about doing something that's sustainable.
Yeah.
Something that nourishes our mental and emotional well-being rather than depleting it.
So how do we do that? How do we find that balance?
Well, Bednarek talks about the importance of creating spaces for collective healing and support.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that we're not alone in this.
Right.
That we're all grappling with these difficult emotions.
It's like that saying, a problem shared is a problem halved.
Exactly. And by sharing our experiences, our fears, our hopes, we can start to build a sense of community, of solidarity, of shared purpose.
Yeah.
And that can be incredibly empowering.
One of the things that really resonated with me in Bednarek's article was her emphasis on allowing ourselves to feel these difficult emotions rather than trying to suppress them.
Right.
She argues that suppressing those feelings actually makes us less resilient in the long run.
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can do it for a while,
Yep.
but eventually it's going to pop back up, often with even more force.
That's such a great analogy.
So instead of trying to push those feelings down,
yeah.
we need to find healthy ways to acknowledge them
Yeah,
and process them.
exactly. And that might look different for everyone, right?
Absolutely.
For some people, it might be journaling or talking to a therapist.
Yeah.
For others, it might be spending time in nature or connecting with loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
The key is to find what works for you
Right.
and to create space for those emotions to be felt and processed.
Absolutely.
Now, Bednarik also talks about this idea of shifting our focus from action for action's sake
Mm-hmm.
to responsibility.
Responsibility.
Mhm.
Interesting. What does she mean by that?
Well, she's essentially arguing that we need to move beyond simply doing things because we feel like we should be doing them
Okay.
and towards acting from a place of deep understanding and connection.
Hmm.
It's about recognizing our responsibility to respond to this crisis
Yeah.
in a way that's both effective and compassionate,
I like it.
both towards ourselves and towards others.
So it's about aligning our actions with our values
Exactly.
and finding a way to act that feels sustainable and nourishing.
Yes. Rather than draining and depleting.
And that brings us back to the emissions gap report,
Right.
and its emphasis on collective action. You know, the report makes it very clear that we need a global transformation, a fundamental shift in how we produce, consume, and relate to the planet.
Right. And that kind of transformation requires us to tap into our collective wisdom,
Absolutely.
our compassion, our resilience.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together
Yeah.
and that we need to support each other as we navigate this complex and challenging terrain.
Okay, so we've talked about moral injury, the importance of processing difficult emotions,
Right.
and the power of collective action.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how do we actually build that collective resilience? What does that look like in practice? Okay, so, we've been talking about, the emotional weight of climate change and the need for collective action.
Yeah.
And I keep coming back to this question of, how do we stay motivated? How do we keep going when the problem feels so huge and progress can feel so slow?
It's a question that I think a lot of people are grappling with.
Right.
And I think the answer lies in finding meaning and purpose
Yeah.
in our response to this crisis.
Yeah.
It's about connecting to something larger than ourselves, something that gives us a sense of hope and direction.
Yeah, it's like that saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Find your why.
Exactly.
When you know why you're doing something, it's so much easier to push through those tough times, to stay committed even when things get challenging.
Absolutely. And that sense of purpose,
Yeah.
can come from a lot of different sources.
Like what?
It might be connecting with your community,
Yeah.
feeling like you're part of something bigger than yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It might be reconnecting with nature,
Okay.
finding solace and inspiration in the natural world. Or it might be drawing on your spiritual beliefs,
Right.
finding strength and guidance in your faith.
Oh. So it's about tapping into what makes us feel alive,
Exactly.
what gives us a sense of belonging and purpose,
Yeah.
and channeling that energy into our efforts to address this crisis.
Think about the people who are on the front lines of this movement,
Mm-hmm.
the activists who are putting their bodies on the line, the scientists who are working tirelessly to find solutions,
Yeah.
the community organizers who are building power from the ground up.
Yeah, they're not doing this work because it's easy
Right.
or because they expect immediate results.
No, they're doing it because they believe in something bigger than themselves.
They found their why,
Uh-huh.
and that's what fuels their commitment. That's what
Smart.
gives them the strength to keep going even in the face of, setbacks and challenges.
And that brings us back to the emissions gap report,
Right.
which really highlights the urgent need for collective action. It paints a very clear picture
Yeah.
of the scale and scope of the problem.
Mm-hmm. But it also points towards the possibility of a different future. A future where we've successfully transitioned to a more sustainable way of life.
And achieving that future,
Yeah.
that transformation,
Yeah.
it requires a collective shift in consciousness.
Okay.
It requires us to believe that change is possible,
Mm-hmm.
to have faith in our collective ability to create a better world.
It's like that idea of the 100th monkey.
Oh, yeah, I love that story. Yeah, once a critical mass of people adopts a new behavior or a way of thinking,
Right?
it starts to spread rapidly through the entire population.
It's a powerful image.
It really is.
And it highlights the fact that our individual actions, our choices, our beliefs,
Yeah.
they have a ripple effect.
They do.
They contribute to a larger collective energy that can either perpetuate the status quo
Right.
or create the conditions for positive change.
So it's not just about what we do.
It's about how we think,
Exactly.
how we feel, how we relate to ourselves, to each other, and to the planet.
Bednarek talks about this in her article.
Oh, yeah.
She calls it transformational resilience.
Transformational resilience?
Yeah. It's not just about bouncing back from adversity.
Yeah.
It's about using the challenges that we face as catalysts
Okay.
for growth, for learning, for transformation.
It's about recognizing that even in the darkest of times, there's always the potential for renewal, for innovation, for a brighter future.
That's powerful.
And that brings us to, I think, the heart of this entire deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, it's not about getting bogged down in despair or feeling overwhelmed by the scale of the challenge.
Right.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose how we respond.
We do.
We can choose to succumb to fear and apathy, or we can choose to embrace hope and action.
And that choice,
Yeah.
ultimately,
Yeah.
is what will determine the future of our planet. It's a choice that each of us makes every single day.
So as we wrap up this episode,
Yeah.
we want to leave you with a question.
Go ahead.
In the face of the climate crisis, what gives you hope? What inspires you to keep going? What role do you want to play in creating a more just and sustainable world?
We encourage you to really reflect on these questions.
Yeah.
And to find your own answers. Because it's in those answers that we find the strength, the resilience,
Yeah.
the hope that we need to navigate this crisis and create a better future for ourselves and for generations to come.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Until next time.